video lecture on Public Economics, Chapter 6.2 on Empirical Regularities of Public Pension System. Hello and welcome to my introductory lecture here on Chapter 6, Public Pension System. This video is part of a graduate course on Social Security and Dynamic General Equilibrium, and you can download the whole playlist from YouTube. You will also find other materials, including computer code in both in MATLAB and in Gauss, teaching slides, problems, and the solution to these problems on my webpage. Now, in the upcoming video here, in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I will try to motivate the topic with public pensions, pay-as-you-go pensions. So why is it called pay-as-you-go? Workers pay for the current old, and when the workers get old, then workers will pay for the retirees. So it takes away labor income, usually part of the labor income from the workers, and distributes it to the retirees. Now, this is one of the biggest economic problems of our times. So we will find out that by 2030, 2035, most continental European countries will face problems so that the revenues generated for the Social Security Authority will not be sufficient to pay the pensions. And governments should deal with this question now and not in 5 or in 10 years when it's too late. So in this introductory chapter here, we will review some of the empirical facts, and let's get into the PDF file, which you can download from my homepage. These are the slides on my book, Public Economics, the Macroeconomic Perspective, Chapter 6, Pensions. Now, public pay-as-you-go pensions were introduced probably for the first time in this world in Germany in 1889. So at this time, Otto von Bismarck, a politician, a chancellor, was trying basically to appeal to the working class people in Germany. He was facing the Social Democratic Party and tried to win over the working class people, which he did not succeed in. And at this time, public pensions did not account for a large share of GDP. So at this time, when you were 70, you could get an old age pension. So mostly it was a disability pension. So in case of invalidity, people who got sick could not work any longer could fall back on this disability pension. Now, in Great Britain and the United States, public pension systems were introduced a little later, so at the turn in the early 20th century. And all these public pension systems were constructed pay-as-you-go, so current workers contribute to the system pays the retired people, the retirees, and when workers get old, they will again receive a pension paid for by the young people. So basically by the next generation. Now this, of course, is very nice to introduce. When politicians introduce such a pay-as-you-go system, there's a windfall profit to the old generation, the retired people. They are 50 or 60, 70 years old, and they know, well, I get a pension, it will be introduced, even though I might not have contributed much. So this is a windfall profit, and of course you get their votes when you propose this system as a politician. Now, all these modern pension systems are more or less built on this pay-as-you-go, take away from the workers, give it to the retirees. And of course, this causes trouble as people get older and older and life expectancy has increased. So, for example, at the time when the public pension system was introduced in Germany, people did not live much longer than 50. So life expectancy was below 50 at this time. And you can imagine if you have to become 70 to get an old age pension, well, chances are really low that you will actually be able to enjoy it. So nowadays that's much different. Life expectancy has increased, and this, of course, has put a lot of pressure on the public pension system. Also, um, in many countries, the birth rate has gone down. So, for example, in China, where Deng Xiaoping even ruled in 1979 that people can have just one child, the one-child policy, which lasted for 35 years. But also in the United States or Germany, we had a lot of babies, the baby boomers, during the 50s and early 60s. And now we are getting into trouble because we have our birth rate, our fertility rates are really low. So then we have, of course, three basic questions. Are public pension systems sustainable? So in 10, 20, or 30 years, can, for example, the US American Social Security Authority or the German pension system still pay the retired people a solid pension, or the one which they promise at least? And how should pension system be reformed in light of this demographic transition? And then we can also ask, what is the optimal level of pension? So as you will see shortly, some pension system, like the Dutch pension system, is very generous, while others are less generous. And what is the optimal amount? Can we economists determine whether pension should be, let's say, 20%, 30%, or 80% of the wage income? And we will get to all these questions in this chapter. To get an idea about the urgency of pension reforms, let's look at the old age dependency ratios in 2000, 2015, and 2050 for these 5 countries: Japan, Italy, Germany, and China, as well as the United States. So the old age dependency ratio here is defined as the number of people 65 and older relative to the number of the 20 to 65-year-old. So this is a good measure for the number of retirees, so those aged above 65, relative to the workers aged 20 to 65. So for example, in Germany, we observe that the effective retirement age, not the legal, we have to look at the effective retirement age, this might differ from the legal retirement age, is around 64 right now. So it's close to this 65 threshold that we impose here. And therefore, the old age dependency ratios here correlate very close with the number of retirees relative to workers. And you find, for example, for Japan, which is one of the grayest economy in this world, if not the grayest, in the year 2000, the old age dependency ratio was approximately 1/3, meaning that 3 workers took care of 1 retiree. By 2015, this has increased to 50%, meaning that not 3, but just 2 workers had to take care of 1 retiree. So the contributions of 2 workers have to finance the pension of this 1 retiree. And in the year 2050, the demographics for Japan are projected to have an old age dependency much above 80%. So we are getting really close to a relation that 1 worker has to finance 1 retiree. And of course, the burden on the worker will become much larger. And usually the burden is imposed as a social security and tax on earnings on the labor income. Another great country is Italy. So as you can see, in the year 2000, they almost had the same old age dependency ratio as Japan. And then they increased a little slower, but still it's close to 80% by 2050, meaning that 5 workers have to sustain 4 retirees. And you can see that it's almost as high in Germany, and to a smaller extent China, which suffers from the one-child policy during the 80s and 90s and the first decade of this century. And United States is actually one of the countries with a very sound demographic structure and is not as in much trouble as is Germany, Italy, or Japan. So in the United States, by the year 2050, about 2 workers have to take care of 1 retiree. Now, these numbers here for 2050, of course, they are projections. So in this picture here on slide 5, you see the frequency distribution of the old age dependency ratio in the United States in 2050. This is a model estimated by the United Nations. And I would like to thank Hannah Savitchkova for providing me with the data. She was involved in setting up this Bayesian model and estimating this model. So thank you to her. And as you can see, the distribution has a large variance. So we have old age dependency ratio ranging from 35 to 57%. And the distribution is not normal. So standard tests reject the null hypothesis of a standard normal distribution. And we have a lot of uncertainty with respect to the projection of the demographics here. So keep this in mind when we talk about future developments, demographics, and sustainability of public pensions. In this figure here, you find the empirical statistics of social security spending in the OECD countries in 2012 as a percentage of GDP. So the continental European countries, which are also highly indebted and are in problems in 2012 and right now because of their high government debt, they are also in trouble because of their pensions. So look at Greece, almost 18% of GDP is spent on pensions. Italy has to spend 16% of GDP on pensions, public pensions. And in France, it's 14%. So these countries which have high debt also have high pension expenditures. So, of course, this casts doubts if these countries can really bring down their debt, the government debt, not even in light of the 2 recent crises, the Great Recession in 2007, 8, 9, and the Corona crisis in 2020, right now, when this video here is taped. But also because of the demographic transition in these countries. France is a little brighter, the prospect of the demographics, than Italy and Greece. But again, the pension system are far too generous. Germany and Japan, the other 2 gray countries that we looked at in the beginning, are in the middle. So they spend about 10% of GDP on public pensions. And look at the English-speaking world. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, UK, US, they are all in the bottom half of public pension spendings. So these countries, as we will find out, they will be fine. They do not suffer much from the demographic transition. Their public finance is going to be sustainable. And we will find out that France, Italy, and Greece, these countries, over the next 10 to 15 years, they will not be able to finance their pensions. Of course, the high government spending or the high spending on public pension is related to the generosity of the public pension system. So look at countries like Italy, where the gross pension replacement rate is above 80% in 2016. This means that the gross pension of the average min is about 80% of the gross pre-retirement earnings. So this pension system is really generous, as in Denmark. And as you can see, the Dutch have an incredible gross pension replacement rate of almost 100%. Now again, the English-speaking world, Australia, United States, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, they are far less generous, and this makes their public pension system much more sustainable. So pick your favorite country here, and also notice that all the countries that have high government debt and have had troubles during the recent Great Recession, when the Euro system was in trouble and Mario Draghi had to save it. Well, like Spain and Portugal, they all have high and generous pension replacement rates. France to a little smaller extent, so the pension replacement rate in France is around 60%. On slide 8, you find the results of a study by Birch, Sopran, and Winter in 2001, and what they looked at were the 3 continental European countries, France, Germany, and Italy. They looked at the economists in 1995, used this as a benchmark, a calibration, looked at the pensions, how generous the pension system were, that the pensions, for example, in France amounted to 12.5% of GDP, in Germany 10%, and in Italy 16%, and that you needed contribution rates of 24.3, 22.6, and 42.6% in order to finance these pensions. So 24 or 22 or 42% on earnings, on labor income. They then looked at the demographics projected for the year 2030 and assumed that pension levels remained constant at the 1995 values, and analyzed how these numbers would increase by 2030. So, for example, in France, pensions would increase to 20% of GDP and the contribution rates goes up to 38%. Italy has to spend a quarter of GDP, almost a quarter of GDP, 23% on pensions, and the contribution rates would go up to 62%. Now, 62%, that's almost very close to the Laffer point of the labor income tax. And for this reason, let's look at the table. So here in the back, you see the whiteboard. On the whiteboard, you see the Laffer curve. Laffer curve, it's named after Arthur Laffer, an economist who was an economic advisor of Ronald Reagan, also a campaign advisor to Donald Trump. And the basic idea of this Laffer curve is to take tax revenue as a function of the labor income tax. And of course, if we have zero labor income taxes, we also get zero tax revenue. If we increase the tax rate, tax revenue go up. And there's some point, however, a turning point, the Laffer maximum, when tax rates become too high, people face such strong disincentive effects to reduce the labor supply that the labor income falls faster than the tax rate increases. And as a consequence, labor taxes decline, the tax revenue. And of course, if we tax 100% of our labor income, we do not work anymore, and therefore tax revenue go down to zero. This is called the famous Laffer curve. And with 62%, we have estimated this Laffer curve in chapter 5 on income taxation in the book. You're very close to the maximum here. So, of course, a contribution rate, a social security tax on labor income has the same shape here as the labor income Laffer curve. Now, what we did with two economists, with two co-authors, with Vito Polito and Mike Wiggins, both authors from the UK, we estimated these curves, and of course we noticed that they depend on demographics. So when the number of working people declines, this Laffer curve also becomes flatter. And for example, we looked at a country like Italy, which is located here, already very close to the top of the Laffer curve, and the United States, for example, which is located very far from this Laffer curve. So Italy has a low fiscal space, can only generate little additional tax revenue, while the United States has a large fiscal space and is very can increase labor income taxes and also social security contributions by a large amount. So we estimated when we will get to this point here in Italy, in the United States, in France, that additional tax revenue from social security taxes on labor income are not enough, not sufficient, insufficient to pay the pensions as promised in these countries. And let's get to the results. As summarized in this table. So we found that in France, this point where the fiscal space has shrunk to zero is attained in the year 2025, so 5 years from now. Germany, 15 years. Italy, 10 years in 2030. Spain, 15 years in 2035. The English-speaking countries, again, are fine, which is no surprise because first they have low labor income taxes and they do not have a very generous pension system. So in the United States, we found there is no point in the next 80 years until 2100 when the fiscal space is too small to finance additional pension payments due to the aging effect. In Great Britain, only in 2090 will there be a situation that the maximum amount that can be raised by imposition of social security tax on labor earnings will be insufficient to finance pensions. There's also a study by Brown and Joins, which studied the same question for Japan, and they found that in 2039, Japan is unable to pay pensions from labor income taxes or social security contributions alone. We then analyzed the question, well, if we increase retirement age, which in most countries is between 65 and 67 at this moment, to the age 70. Well, in this case, all countries were able to generate enough revenues for the social security system, except France, Italy, and Spain. So the continental European countries with the generous pension system, with the high replacement rate of pensions relative to gross labor earnings. These countries, which also have already high government debt, they will have trouble to finance the public pay-as-you-go pension system, even if they increase the retirement age to 70. The hyphen here indicates that the fiscal remains strictly positive, so the fiscal space is above zero and we can finance pensions with labor income taxes only. So let us get back to the 3 questions that I posed at the beginning of this video lecture here. Are public pensions sustainable? Well, in the English-speaking countries, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, United States, United Kingdom, Ireland, no problem. Continental Europe, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the countries with the trouble in the euro system, they will not be able to finance their pensions with the help of social security contributions that are levied on labor income taxes alone. So they need to decrease pensions or provide other means to finance them, for example, a value-added tax on consumption. Probably it's going to be a mixture of both policies. So we will look at the possible reforms in this pension system in this chapter. And finally, we ask ourselves, what is the optimal level of pensions? And there we find that it's extremely low. So studies that have looked at the optimal level of pensions mostly concentrated on the United States, but also in other countries, they found that the optimal replacement rate of pensions with respect to labor earnings, the gross replacement rate, is below 20%. So if you compare this to all the levels prevailing in the OECD, all countries except the United Kingdom have replacement rates way above 20%. So we have to discuss why do we observe such high replacement rates and if it's optimal to reduce them. Okay, in the following chapter, in the following video, we will look at a simple two-period model. So first we look at a model where we have workers and retirees, and they live equal length. So workers work for 40 years and retire for 40 years. Of course, this is not really realistic. And then we will go on to an Auerbach-Kotlikoff style model where we identify the periods with years. So we have a 60 period overlapping generations model where people live from the age 20 to the age 80. Typically in the present literature, you often look at larger time horizons. So from year 20 to year 100, so that people may live 80 years, and analyze the effect of the demographic transition in these models, where the demographic structure is much closer to empirical values. But we can learn a lot of insights from this two-period model and find that the disincentive effect of public pensions on saving is so strong that this general equilibrium effect also has a strong impact on the optimal amount of pensions, which are really low. So I invite you to watch the next video where we first look at the difference between a pay-as-you-go system and a fully funded system. So in a pay-as-you-go system, the current workers pay for the current retirees, and in a fully funded system, you pay contributions to the public pension system. They invested in the stock market or in the capital markets, and when you're old, you will receive an annuity of your savings, which are done by the government on behalf of you.